The moment I stepped into the conference room, I knew something was wrong. The air felt different, too formal, too stiff. Sitting at the far end of the long, polished table was Jason Preston, CEO of Preston & Lane Consulting, the company I had dedicated the last 15 years of my life to. Beside him was Rebecca, the HR manager, her expression carefully neutral. A manila folder sat in front of them. I had been in this room countless times before, usually leading client strategy meetings. But this time, I wasn't invited as an asset. I was the problem. "Elizabeth, please have a seat," Jason said, his tone too smooth, too rehearsed. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before sitting down, my hands instinctively folding in my lap. I had been with this company since my 20s. I had worked my way up from an entry-level position, building relationships with our most valuable clients, securing multi-million-dollar contracts, and expanding our portfolio across industries. The idea that I could be called into a meeting like this without prior warning was absurd. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "First of all, I want to thank you for your years of dedication. Your work has been invaluable to this company." I felt a chill creep up my spine. I had heard those exact words before. When we let go of underperforming employees, when we needed to downsize, when we needed to push someone out, under the guise of strategic restructuring. Rebecca cleared her throat. "Elizabeth, after careful evaluation, we've decided to make some changes in leadership. As part of our long-term vision, we are restructuring the client relations department to align with new company goals." My pulse quickened. "And what exactly does that mean for me?" Jason exhaled slowly, as if trying to appear sympathetic. "It means today will be your last day at Preston & Lane." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let it show. I had spent years negotiating high-stakes deals, managing difficult clients, and handling corporate politics. I wasn't about to crack in front of Jason Preston. "You're letting me go," I said, my voice flat, controlled. Rebecca nodded. "This decision wasn't made lightly. We recognize your contributions, which is why we're offering you a generous severance package." She slid the manila folder across the table. 2 months' salary plus health benefits through the next quarter. I stared at the folder, but didn't touch it. 2 months. That was the price of 15 years of loyalty. I had built relationships that sustained this company, secured accounts that brought in millions in revenue, and now they were discarding me as if I were just another replaceable employee. I met Jason's gaze. "Who's replacing me?" For the first time, he hesitated. A flicker of something, guilt, unease, flashed across his face before he masked it with that corporate detachment. Rebecca answered instead. "Christina Miller will be taking over your role." I had to fight the urge to laugh. Christina had joined the company barely 6 months ago. She had no experience in client relations, no long-term industry connections. What she did have, however, was Jason's attention. I had seen the way he looked at her, the way he leaned in just a little too close during meetings, the way she smiled at him like they shared a secret. "Of course." I took a slow breath and straightened my posture. "So let me get this straight. After 15 years, after everything I've done for this company, you're pushing me out so Jason's latest office distraction can play executive?" Jason's expression hardened. "That's not what this is about." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "Sure, whatever helps you sleep at night." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. "Elizabeth, we understand this is difficult, but we need you to clear out your office by the end of the day. Security will assist you." Security, as if I were some kind of threat. I exhaled through my nose, forcing my emotions into check. "Fine," I said, standing up. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Jason relaxed slightly, as if relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. "I appreciate your professionalism," he said. I smiled. "Oh, don't thank me just yet." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the conference room. But as I stepped into the hallway, my mind was already working, calculating. They thought they could erase me from this company without consequences. They thought I would just walk away, humiliated and defeated. They had no idea what they had just started. Packing up 15 years of my life in a cardboard box should have felt like an ending, but as I stood in my office, sliding framed photographs and personal notebooks into the box, I felt nothing but a slow, burning fury. The office buzzed around me as if nothing had happened. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, people walked by my open door pretending not to notice. Some paused briefly, offering me sympathetic looks they thought were discreet, but not a single person stepped inside. I wasn't surprised. No one wanted to align themselves with the woman who had just been erased. I had seen it happen before. The corporate world had an unspoken rule. When someone is pushed out, you act as if they never existed. But I picked up a framed photo of our team at last year's corporate retreat, where we had landed a deal with a Fortune 500 client after months of negotiations. I had personally built that relationship, ensuring the contract renewal would secure the company millions in long-term revenue. Now, I was being replaced by a woman whose only qualification seemed to be her ability to keep Jason entertained. I tossed the photo into the trash, let them rewrite history if they wanted to. As I shut down my computer for the last time, I noticed an unread email from Greg Harris, one of our biggest clients. The subject line read, "Call me ASAP." I hesitated, then opened it. "Liz, I just heard rumors that you're leaving. Tell me this isn't true, we need to talk." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Greg Harris wasn't just any client. He was one of the most influential executives in the financial sector, someone who valued personal relationships over flashy presentations. I had been working with him for almost a decade. If he was already hearing whispers, it meant Jason and Rebecca had wasted no time trying to control the narrative. I grabbed my phone and stepped into the hallway, ignoring the way people suddenly busied themselves as I passed. I dialed Greg's number and he picked up on the first ring. "Jesus, Liz, what the hell is going on?" His voice was sharp, cutting straight to the point. "Exactly what you think," I said, keeping my tone even. "Jason decided to make some changes. Today's my last day." Silence, then a low curse. "They're out of their minds. Who the hell is going to handle our account?" I hesitated. "Christina Miller." Greg let out a humorless laugh. "You're joking." "I wish I were." He exhaled sharply. "She doesn't know the first thing about our business. I don't deal with people who need hand-holding. You and I built a system, Liz. I don't want to start from scratch with some executive's pet project." I glanced over my shoulder, lowering my voice. "I understand. But you also know how this works." Jason made his decision. Greg didn't respond right away, but I could hear the irritation in his breathing. Then, his voice lowered. "Where are you going next?" I pressed my lips together. "I haven't decided yet." "Well, when you do, call me." I didn't say anything, but my grip tightened on my phone. I returned to my office and grabbed a USB drive from my desk drawer. It wasn't against company policy to take personal files, and technically my client notes weren't proprietary information, they were my own records, notes on strategies and client preferences that I had built over the years. I slid the drive into my bag. A shadow appeared in the doorway. I looked up to see Christina standing there, arms crossed, her lips curved in something that was supposed to resemble a smile, but came off as condescending. "Hey Liz," she said, drawing out my name like we were old friends. "I just wanted to stop by and say no hard feelings." I stared at her, expressionless. "I mean, I know this must be hard for you," she continued, stepping inside uninvited. "But Jason really believes this is the right direction for the company. He thinks I bring a fresh perspective." Fresh perspective. That was corporate talk for someone who hadn't earned their place but wanted everyone to pretend otherwise. "I'm sure he does," I said, keeping my voice polite. Christina glanced at the half-packed box on my desk. "You know, I'd love to pick your brain before you go. Maybe you can give me some insight on how you handled things with Greg Harris and the other major accounts." I tilted my head slightly, pretending to consider it, then I smiled. "Sure. Here's my insight. Greg hates incompetence." Her expression flickered for a second before she recovered. "I see." "No, Christina, I don't think you do," I said, stepping closer. "You can wear the title, sit in my office, take my salary, but you can't fake relationships, you can't download trust. You don't even know what you don't know." Her smile faltered. I leaned in slightly, "Enjoy the job while it lasts." Her lips parted, but before she could say anything, I picked up my box and walked out. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Michael Donovan. "Liz, let's talk. I think we can help each other." I smiled to myself. Jason and Christina thought they had erased me from Preston and Lane. They thought I was finished. They had no idea I was just getting started. Michael Donovan's office was nothing like the cold corporate space I had just left behind. It had the same floor-to-ceiling windows, the same expensive furniture, but there was an energy here that Preston and Lane had lost years ago. Where Jason's office felt like a showroom designed for investors, Michael's felt like a command center. Papers stacked in neat but busy piles, a whiteboard covered in client strategies, a half-empty coffee cup next to his laptop. He didn't care about appearances, he cared about results. Michael was the CEO of Donovan and Associates, one of our biggest competitors. He was sharp, aggressive, and had a reputation for poaching talent from firms that got too comfortable. I had met him years ago at a business conference where he had jokingly tried to recruit me over cocktails. Back then, I had laughed it off, loyal to Preston and Lane. Now, I was sitting across from him in his office, and he wasn't joking. "You made a hell of an exit, Liz," he said, leaning back in his chair. The moment I heard what happened, I knew Jason was making a mistake. I kept my expression neutral. "And yet, you don't seem surprised." Michael smirked. "Jason was always going to self-destruct. He runs that place like a power-hungry politician, not a businessman. He doesn't understand that relationships drive revenue, not fancy PowerPoint decks and dinner parties." He steepled his fingers. "Which is exactly why I asked you here." I already knew where this was going, but I let him talk. "I want you at Donovan and Associates," he said simply. "You don't need me to tell you that. You've already proven your value. I don't care about titles or corporate games. If you bring in the clients, you get a seat at the table. No red tape, no politics, just results." I exhaled slowly, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, but I wasn't in a rush to jump back into anything. I had the upper hand right now, and I intended to use it wisely. "You're not the only one who's called me," I said, watching him carefully. Michael's mouth twitched slightly, amused. "I figured. You're a free agent now. But let's be real, Liz. The people calling you, they want you to fix their mess. I don't need you to fix anything. I need you to win." I leaned forward. "And what does winning look like to you?" Michael's smirk widened. Jason and I have been circling the same top-tier clients for years. He got a lot of them first because Preston and Lane had a legacy reputation. But things have changed. His clients don't trust him like they used to, and if they don't trust him, they're open to alternatives. He let that sink in before continuing. "I don't need all of them. I just need the right ones, and I think you know exactly who those are." Greg Harris flashed through my mind immediately. He wasn't the only one. There were others, clients who had voiced concerns about the direction Preston and Lane was going, about Jason's leadership, about the turnover in key positions. I had spent years keeping those concerns in check, reassuring them that the company's core values hadn't changed. Now, without me there, those concerns would grow into real doubts. "I'm not interested in being someone's revenge play," I said finally. Michael chuckled. "This isn't about revenge. It's about opportunity. If Jason had been smart, you'd still be running his client relations team and I'd be trying to steal clients from you. But now he's bleeding and you're holding the knife. The only question is whether you want to use it." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I thought about Jason, sitting in his glass office, so sure that his decision to replace me was just another calculated business move. I thought about Christina, who probably hadn't realized yet that the title she had stolen came with responsibilities she wasn't prepared for. Finally, I met Michael's gaze. "What are you offering?" A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "A seat at the executive table, autonomy to handle clients the way you see fit, and a performance-based compensation package that will make your last salary look like a rounding error." I let that settle between us. "I'll think about it," I said, standing. Michael didn't seem offended. If anything, he looked pleased. "Take your time. Just don't take too long. The market moves fast." I left his office knowing one thing for certain. I wasn't done playing. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed quiet, watching from the sidelines as Preston and Lane stumbled through their first week without me. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. I got my first call from a former colleague 3 days after I left. "Liz, you would not believe the disaster happening over here," she whispered. "Christina tried to run a client meeting today. It was brutal. She kept using buzzwords, talking in circles. Greg Harris walked out 10 minutes in. I smiled to myself. Did he say anything? Just that he doesn't do business with amateurs. That was only the beginning. Over the next week, I heard more. Clients weren't responding to Christina's emails. Jason was trying to do damage control, but he was spread too thin. The confidence that had made Preston and Lane seem untouchable was unraveling. Then, on Friday morning, my phone rang. Greg Harris. "Tell me where you're going next," he said the moment I picked up. I didn't answer right away. "Come on, Liz, I don't trust these people anymore. If you're making a move, I want in." I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the desk. I had options, I had leverage, and most importantly, I had time. "Give me the weekend," I said. Greg let out a short laugh. "Fine, but don't make me wait too long." I hung up and stared out the window. Jason and Christina thought they could replace me. They thought the clients I had built relationships with would stay loyal to the company instead of the person behind the emails and handshakes. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. Jason and Christina had underestimated me. They thought I would disappear quietly, that I would lick my wounds and move on like so many others before me, but they had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just another disposable employee. I was the reason half their biggest clients had stayed with Preston and Lane in the first place. And now that I was gone, those clients were starting to realize the truth. They hadn't been working with Preston and Lane. They had been working with me. I called Michael Donovan first thing. "I'm in," I said simply. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Good choice. I'll have the contract sent over within the hour. Welcome to Donovan and Associates, Liz." I didn't waste time celebrating. The moment my paperwork was signed, I started making calls. Not aggressive pitches, not blatant poaching, just simple conversations with people I had known for years. People who trusted me. People who had already seen the cracks forming at Preston and Lane. I called Greg Harris first. "Let me guess," he said before I could even speak. "You're making a move." "I just joined Donovan and Associates," I said, keeping my tone even. He exhaled sharply. "Good. I'm sick of dealing with amateurs. Let's set up a meeting." I smiled to myself. "How about lunch tomorrow?" Done. One by one, I reached out to key clients. I didn't ask them to leave Preston and Lane. I didn't have to. I just let them know where I was now, and the moment I did, their frustrations started pouring out. "Christina doesn't know what she's doing." "Jason isn't even responding to emails anymore." "They keep making promises they can't keep." Honestly, I don't feel comfortable staying with them. By the end of the day, 3 major clients had asked for meetings. Meanwhile, the chaos at Preston and Lane was getting worse. The same colleagues who had been too afraid to speak to me on my way out were now flooding my phone with updates. "Jason is freaking out. He called an emergency meeting this morning. Christina is in way over her head. She lost her temper on a client call today. They just lost another account. People are panicking." It was happening even faster than I expected. Jason had always been good at pretending he was in control, but he had never actually been tested. Now, without me there to smooth things over, without me handling the clients, he was exposed. Tuesday morning, I met Greg Harris for lunch. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Here's the deal, Liz," he said, setting his drink down. "I don't trust Preston and Lane anymore. They made it clear they don't care about long-term relationships, and I'm not about to risk my business on their incompetence. If I'm going to work with someone, it needs to be someone I know can actually deliver." I nodded. I understand. He studied me for a moment. "Donovan and Associates. Do they get that?" "They do. Michael built that firm by doing the opposite of what Jason does. No corporate ego, no empty promises, just results. That's why I joined him." Greg leaned back in his chair, thinking. Then he smiled. "All right, let's make it official." And just like that, Preston and Lane lost one of their biggest accounts. The next few days were a whirlwind. News spread fast in the industry, and once people heard that Greg Harris had moved, others started questioning their own loyalty to Preston and Lane. Clients that had been hesitant before were now calling me directly, asking about Donovan and Associates. Jason's empire was crumbling, and he knew it. On Friday, I got the call I had been expecting. "Elizabeth," Jason's voice was tight, controlled. "I think we should talk." I let a beat of silence stretch between us. "About what?" "You know damn well about what," he snapped. "We're losing clients, and I don't think it's a coincidence that it started happening the moment you left." I kept my tone neutral. "That sounds like a management issue, Jason." He let out a sharp breath. "Let's cut the crap, Liz. You're taking them." I smirked to myself. "Jason, I don't take anything. Clients make their own decisions. Maybe you should ask yourself why they're leaving." There was a long pause, and for the first time, I heard something new in his voice. Not just frustration, not just anger, fear. "You need to stop," he said finally, but it didn't sound like an order. It sounded like a plea. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "No, Jason, I really don't." And then I hung up. By the time I walked into the Donovan and Associates office Monday morning, Preston and Lane was already in full-scale panic mode. Over the weekend, 2 more major clients had severed their contracts, and the news had started to spread. The financial sector was a small world. When big clients made sudden moves, people noticed. The whispers were turning into discussions, discussions into decisions. Jason had spent years believing his firm was untouchable. Now he was realizing just how fragile it really was. I settled into my new office, which was still bare except for my laptop and a neatly stacked pile of client briefs. The space felt different, not just because it was new, but because it was mine in a way that my office at Preston and Lane had never been. Here, I wasn't just another cog in Jason's machine. I had autonomy, real authority. And more importantly, I had leverage. Michael leaned against my doorway, a coffee in one hand, a smirk on his face. "You know, I thought this would take at least a few months, but at this rate, Jason's going to be standing in an empty office by next week." I glanced up from my screen. That's what happens when you build an empire on arrogance instead of relationships. Michael took a sip of his coffee. "Any more calls over the weekend?" "4, I said, leaning back in my chair. 3 of them are ready to move immediately. The 4th is on the fence, but I have a feeling they won't be for long." Michael nodded. "Jason called me yesterday." That got my attention. I arched an eyebrow. "And?" "He's desperate," Michael said, grinning. He tried to pretend he wasn't, but it was obvious. He asked if we could discuss mutual client interests. Translation, he's trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding. I smirked. "And what did you tell him?" Michael shrugged. "I told him I'd think about it, let him sweat a little." I shook my head, amused. He must be losing his mind. "Oh, he is," Michael said, pushing off the doorway. "And I intend to enjoy every second of it. Keep doing what you're doing, Liz. We're winning." I didn't need to be told twice. That afternoon, I had a meeting with another high-profile client who had been with Preston and Lane for over a decade. David Monroe, CEO of a mid-sized investment firm, had always been a cautious man. He wasn't one to make sudden moves, but he also wasn't blind to reality. We met in a quiet corner of an upscale steakhouse, the kind of place where business deals were sealed over bourbon and perfectly cooked filet mignon. David didn't waste time with small talk. "I need to know one thing, Liz," he said, swirling the ice in his glass. "If I make the switch, are you personally handling my account?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "You'll get the same level of service you always have. Actually, better. No corporate red tape, no middle management interference, just results." David studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'm in." Another client gone. Another crack in Jason's foundation. By Wednesday, Preston and Lane had lost close to 40% of their high-value accounts. The fallout was no longer just internal, it was becoming public knowledge. Industry blogs were starting to pick up on the shakeup, speculating about what was happening behind the scenes. The firm's reputation was unraveling, and Jason was scrambling to control the damage. Then, late that afternoon, I got another call. "Jason." I let it ring twice before answering. "Jason." His voice was tense. "We need to talk." I glanced at my schedule. "I'm busy." "Liz, don't play games with me," he snapped. "I know what you're doing." I leaned back in my chair, completely unfazed. And what's that? You think you can just steal my clients? I laughed softly. Steal? Jason, clients aren't property. They go where they feel valued, and right now, that's not with you. There was silence on the other end, then a sharp exhale. I'll make you an offer. I raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Come back, he said, his voice tight. I'll match whatever Donovan is paying you. No, I'll do better. Name your price. For a brief moment, I let myself enjoy the irony. Jason, who had tossed me aside like I was replaceable, was now begging me to come back. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated my relationships, my influence, my ability to adapt, and now he was paying for it. I let the silence stretch, then said, no. Jason's breath hitched. What? I said no, I repeated, my voice calm, steady. I don't work for people who only realize my value after they've lost everything. You're making a mistake, he said, but the desperation in his voice made it clear that he was the one who had made the real mistake. I smiled to myself. No, Jason, I think I finally got it right. And then I hung up. By the end of the week, Preston and Lane was in free fall. The once stable firm, known for its ironclad reputation in the financial sector, was bleeding clients faster than it could contain the damage. The industry had taken notice, and the narrative was shifting from quiet concerns to open speculation. Blog headlines began surfacing, what's happening at Preston and Lane, major clients flee consulting giant, and with each passing day their stock in the business world plummeted further. I had heard from former colleagues that Jason had called an all-hands emergency meeting. The message was clear. Anyone caught speaking to me or even mentioning my name would face consequences. That only made people more eager to share details. Jason's losing it, one of them whispered over the phone. Christina is panicking. She can't keep up, and clients are ripping into her. The board is demanding answers, but Jason is just doubling down. He still thinks he can salvage this. I had seen this before, leaders who believed their power was permanent, that their name alone could keep a company afloat. Jason had built Preston and Lane on the illusion of control. Now that illusion was cracking, and he didn't know how to stop it. Then on Monday morning, I got the call I had been expecting. Not from Jason. From Preston and Lane's board of directors. I was in my office at Donovan & Associates when my assistant knocked on the door, a curious expression on her face. Liz, there's a call for you. It's someone from Preston and Lane, a board member. I raised an eyebrow. Which one? James Caldwell. That was interesting. Caldwell was one of the firm's most influential board members. Old money, old power, the kind of man who didn't make calls unless something was seriously wrong. I picked up the phone. James, I said smoothly, to what do I owe the pleasure? A pause. Then Elizabeth. I think we should meet. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to consider it. That's surprising, considering I don't work for you anymore. Another pause. Let's cut to the chase. We both know the firm is in trouble. You've played this well. I smirked. I wasn't playing anything, James. Clients make their own choices. Of course, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't buying the act. But here's the reality. We're losing revenue at an unsustainable rate. The partners are getting nervous. The board is considering changes. Now we were getting to it. Changes, I repeated. You were a key figure at Preston and Lane, Caldwell continued. You know the business inside and out. We recognize that mistakes were made, and we want to correct them. If you're open to a conversation, we'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing you back under better terms. I almost laughed. Jason had fired me. He had let his ego blind him to the fact that I was the foundation of his client relationships. And now, after gutting the company from the inside, the board was scrambling to fix the mess by offering me a seat back at the table. I tapped my fingers against my desk, and what would those terms be? You'd return in an executive capacity, Caldwell said smoothly. Full control over client relations, higher compensation. You'd have the authority to rebuild what's been lost. I already knew my answer, but I let the silence stretch long enough for discomfort to creep in. Then, finally, I spoke. I appreciate the offer, I said, my voice steady, but I'm going to have to decline. Caldwell didn't react immediately, but I could hear the sharp inhale on the other end. Elizabeth, be reasonable. We're offering you a chance to reclaim your position on your terms. My terms? I said, my voice turning colder. James, let me remind you how this all started. I didn't walk away from Preston and Lane. You pushed me out. You decided I was replaceable. And now that you're realizing that was a mistake, you expect me to come back and clean up the mess? No, my terms are simple. I'm done. Silence. Then Jason won't survive this. I know, I said, and then I hung up. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The best revenge wasn't just watching Preston and Lane collapse. It was knowing they had reached out, knowing they had tried to fix their mistakes the only way they knew how, by trying to buy their way out of it. And knowing that I had denied them the one thing they needed most. By the end of the week, Jason was gone. The official story was that he had stepped down to pursue new opportunities, but everyone knew the truth. He had been forced out. The board had no choice. He had gambled the company's future, and he had lost. As for Christina, she didn't last much longer. Without Jason's protection, her inexperience was too obvious to ignore. Clients weren't willing to take a chance on someone who had never earned their trust. Within a month, she was gone too. Preston and Lane still existed, but it was a shell of what it had once been. Their reputation was tarnished, their leadership unstable, their client base gutted. And me? I had moved on. I had built something better. I had taken everything Jason thought was his and turned it into something stronger, something that was mine. And I had done it without ever looking back. 6 months after Jason's downfall, I barely thought about Preston and Lane anymore. What had once been a defining part of my life had become nothing more than a cautionary tale in the business world. Every now and then, I'd hear snippets, how the firm was still struggling, how the board had cycled through 2 interim CEOs trying to stabilize things, how former colleagues were quietly jumping ship before it was too late. But it didn't matter to me anymore. I had won. Donovan and Associates was thriving. The clients who had followed me had settled in, trusting that they were in better hands. Michael, true to his word, had given me full control over client relations, and for the first time in my career, I was calling the shots without corporate politics tying my hands. My department had grown, bringing in some of the best talent in the industry. We weren't just succeeding, we were dominating. One evening, as I was wrapping up a late meeting, my assistant knocked on my office door. "You have a visitor," she said, looking vaguely amused. "Jason Preston." I raised an eyebrow. "Here?" She nodded. "Should I send him away?" I almost said yes, but then curiosity got the better of me. "No, send him in." Jason walked in looking nothing like the man I had worked under for 15 years. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something strained, almost hollow. He had lost weight, the sharpness of his tailored suits doing little to hide how much smaller he seemed. He didn't sit, he just stood there looking around as if seeing the office itself was some kind of insult. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. Enjoying what? Watching everything fall apart. I tilted my head slightly. "I didn't do that, Jason. You did." He let out a bitter laugh. "You always were a lot smarter than I gave you credit for." I said nothing. He already knew that was true. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I need a job, Liz." For a brief second, I thought I had misheard him. But no, Jason Preston, the man who had fired me without a second thought, was now standing in my office asking for a job. "You?" I asked, unable to keep the amusement out of my voice. "Here?" "I know how it sounds," he muttered, jaw tightening, "but I don't have many options. The industry knows what happened. My reputation is shot. I can't even get calls returned from firms I used to consider beneath me. You're the only one who would even take a meeting." I let silence stretch between us, watching as the reality of his situation settled on him. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You fired me, humiliated me, replaced me with someone completely incompetent. Then, when it all came crashing down, you tried to bring me back like nothing happened. And now that you've lost everything, you think I'll give you a job?" Jason swallowed hard, and for the first time in his life, he looked like he truly understood what it felt like to be powerless. I made a mistake, he admitted, voice raw. I let my ego get in the way, and I'm paying for it. I just need a chance to start over. I let the moment hang, considering him, considering the man he had been, the choices he had made. Then I slowly stood, walking around my desk until I was standing directly in front of him. You're right, I said softly. You did make a mistake. For a second, hope flickered in his eyes. And then I smiled. But I'm not the person who's going to fix it for you. His face fell. I stepped back, gesturing toward the door. Good luck, Jason. He hesitated, as if there was something else he wanted to say, but in the end he just nodded stiffly and walked out of my office. I watched him go, then turned back to my desk, exhaling as I sank into my chair. No, I didn't need to watch him suffer. I didn't need to see what happened to him next, because I had already won.